today we're talking about money, 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 money,
Money,
right?
money, money.
Yes. So let's talk about money. And I hear there's this thing called zero-based budget. Is that right, Sandy?
Yes. So, little background about me. I'm CPA by trade, 22 years, accounting firm, um, accounting degree, had always worked in accounting, then CFO, finance. So I always say my passion was with people, my background is with money, and they actually work hand in hand together. So um, the zero-based budgeting. So I still, here, and if anybody's looking, I've got my cowboy hat on, and the cowboy hat will be a story coming up. And I decided I also have date night, so I'm going to wear it tonight.
Oh, fun.
But when Amy and I got all excited because we're going to talk about money, and look, I got my money for a prop, and I wanted to be specific in that and very practical, because part of what we talk about is in your real, your ideal is practical ways to look at things, deal with life, deal with everything in the real. And money is it's a part of that. It's a part of living and enjoyment, because we have to spend money on things, and we have security in having money, and we have angst in not having it, and it is a part of our life. um, I thought the zero-based budgeting, number one, it'd be a great conversation, and it's very top of mind to me right now, and I'll get into that a little bit because it's something I've worked with for a long time, but by default we have been dealing with zero-based budgeting whether we wanted to or not during COVID. Part of it was just because we went back to zero, and other is from companies and from businesses. With no revenue, you have to look at where your money is going to go. And many people did not have any revenue, or they had the threat of not having revenue. So let's start with just simplistically, what is zero-based budgeting? Okay. Zero-based budgeting is basically starting at zero, assuming that you have no budget. You are flatlined, no budget, starting from zero, and looking at everything and justifying every expense to see if you need it, if it has a return on investment. I'll use that term for businesses, but as individuals, this everything with this applies to companies, big businesses, small businesses, solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, individuals of all ages. Okay. Just like any kind of an expense, you need to look at it and say, am I getting out of it? What am I getting a return on that? Is it bringing me enjoyment? This really ties back to your real, Amy, that you
Right.
talked about it. Is it essential? Am I getting enjoyment from it? Is it sustainable? Can I continue this for a long period, or should I get used to not having it right now? So zero-based budgeting is a very practical and simplistic approach of saying, let's start at zero. Let's look at everything we spend, and let's decide what is really needed, what is wanted, and budget based off of that. And the reality is that might sound really simple, that you say, oh gosh, isn't that just a normal thing? Nobody does it, Amy. What everybody does is they keep spending, and in a business context, they take whatever they spent last year and they say, here's my budget and I want to increase it by 2%. And nobody really goes back and digs into, is it still necessary? Did I get what I wanted out of those previous costs? What are my recurring costs? And what that happens? We always call it the monthly nugget of what you spend. It keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because you are imputing cost of living increases and adding more expenses. In zero-based budgeting really brings it home to say, you know what, I'm going to justify everything I'm spending money on to see if that's really what we need to continue to spend money on. And that's how you set the budget.
Goodness. So you're right. It sounds very simplistic, but as you're sitting there and talking about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, how hard is that to go through every single item and justify it and make sure that it's aligned with your values, it's aligned with your needs, it's aligned, we kind of organically did this with when COVID hit. Just
Exactly.
personally, because I mean, my business pretty much went silent. Like everything was going silent. And it was like, okay, so what's the income look like with everything being silent? What do we need to scale back on? And some things we had just been kind of continuing, because we'd just been continuing on, but we had a conversation of, okay, where are some things that we don't necessarily need anymore? And we've had this conversation many times. We didn't start at the zero-based budget, but I think that would be a really good exercise. But we had kind of that mind shift. But we did this when we changed away from cable. It was like, all right,
What do
what
you
are
need
we
to do?
doing? We've got all these streaming things, but we still have cable. And it was like, what if we just do this little shift and we save probably $100 a month by, getting rid of cable. So anyway, this is
From
awesome.
from a business standpoint, here's a great example. So what happened? I mean, what literally happened during COVID is I work with no more than 4 businesses at once to varying degrees, but I take on a handful of clients that I help out in kind of a rent a CFO role.
Uh-huh.
And just like that, when COVID hit, when there were so many unknowns, we were forced into a zero-based budgeting to say, we were looking at PPP dollars, how to keep employees employed, but we were looking at every expense. And I'll tell you, very good business people, very good accounting people in their office, and we were finding expenses that nobody knew really what they were. And because you just keep paying them, and they might not be huge, but
Right.
they just keep adding up and adding up. And I equate it to my kids live off of debit cards, and they pay everything from the debit cards. And if their debit card gets lost, that's like zero-based budgeting, because they basically have to figure out what was coming out of that card and decide what they want once again, which is actually not a bad exercise. But we were finding things on the business side of, okay, marketing. Maybe a company opened 5 years ago, and developing a brand takes a lot of marketing spend. But once you develop that brand, you can reallocate those funds and do Facebook ads, push things out. But you shouldn't, back to ROI, they got their ROI after off of developing the brand. The marketing budget shouldn't stay that same dollar amount. It isn't a matter of, we have X in our marketing budget, how are we going to spend it? It's, what are we trying to get out of it? And that doesn't mean it has to be a recurring cost from year to year. So it was just a great exercise to go through. And it was a state of mind and a state of being. And what I found is, as I was going through that exercise with the businesses, of how applicable it applies to the individual, and how it's actually harder with the individual, because we're creatures of habit. And so some of these things we say, I need it, I need it, I need it. But that's because it's become ingrained in our daily life. And what
Hmm.
COVID did is it broke those habits, even if we wanted to do things.
Right.
So if we say, let's just use this example. Garrett and I love to have date night. So, we do 3 date nights a week because we needed that. We wanted that. And it sounds great. Like, I could convince you right now, you and Tom
Yep.
need to go out 3 nights a week and go out for dinner.
I would sign up.
Guess what happened with COVID? Restaurants closed. So guess what we did? That time did not go away. We'd go in the hot tub. We'd come watch a movie. I'd make dinner. He'd help me make dinner. We'd talk over dinner. So we got the same quality time. In our minds, we needed to go out 3 nights a week, right? And then
Right.
you throw alcohol in there, Amy. And by the way, for anyone
Right.
who's
Right.
listening, we
Oh yeah.
decided 5 minutes before Cheers, Amy, that we were going to make
Cheers.
happy hour because it is Friday afternoon.
It is
But
Friday afternoon, and we're both going out tonight, so it's kind of like,
we're,
hey,
we're
let's not
ready.
early.
But the COVID, the other thing, that by breaking the habits, because it's really easy to say, and that's another thing I would challenge everyone to, is if you say, do I need this? Try going without it. Try going
Right.
without it. Try an alternative to it, because I think most people will say, I actually like cooking now, or you're so used to cooking or baking or doing things at home. That's the new normal. And there are several things that cost less money because we're not just going out and doing them anymore. We found alternative means.
Right. And one of the things um, along these lines is we are being really intentional about what we spend our money on.
Right.
So, we're not just going out to go out. We're like, okay, who's a local restaurant that we want to support?
Support.
And so we're going to go to them. We're not just going to, what's easiest, convenient, and, you know, the quickest or whatever. It's like we're being really intentional about supporting the restaurants we want. We're being really intentional about buying things from the stores we want. You know, it's more of a intentional shopping, I would say, at least. And so this zero base, like when you start at zero, do you go through every single purchase?
Everything. And
Everything.
talk about it. And not just, I need that. Talk through what. And like my point is, maybe take it away for a little bit and see if you can do without it.
Yeah.
But this
Yeah.
isn't, one big thing this isn't about the poverty mentality. Okay. And I lecture businesses about this. Do not get into the poverty mentality, because we are looking on a return of investment, a return for the money, for enjoyment, quality of life. And we
Right.
don't have to be paupers. Okay. So, but it's you can make that determination of whether it's worth it and whether you're getting out of it what you think you're going to get out of it, or if there's another alternative. So, again, back to, it's not about not ever going out to eat, not ever having fun, having the poverty mentality of the sky's going to fall, so I'm never going to spend a dime and I'm going to pull it all away for when it all hits. No, don't. It's not that. Part of that is always trying to save and be ready for the rainy day. But I'll add on to your story about supporting local businesses. One thing Garrett and I are very conscious of is when the wait staff, I've waited tables before. Okay. My kids have waited tables before. They have half the capacity in those restaurants, even with the bump outs. They're not making the money that they used to make. And
Right.
so we tip very well. So we might go out one night a week and we might have to order our food and take it over to the side, but we really tip our staff well, and support local businesses, because we understand that it's harder for them. We all got to help each other out too,
Right.
right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
And so getting around the thing I'd say too is zero-based budgeting and starting at zero is don't get into the poverty mentality, but put enough aside. If you don't know what you want to spend it on, then save it and go buy a cowboy hat for a lot of money that you've been dying to get for a year when you want to buy it. So part
Yeah.
of it is putting money away too, so that when something does come up that you really want, you're equipped to purchase that.
Yeah. So tell me about the cowboy hat. You wanted it for a year?
Yeah, when we moved to Durango, I had always wanted a cowboy hat, but the practicality in Omaha, because
Right.
you go to the
It,
rodeo and
yes.
you
And
know
if anybody's watching the video, Sandy has on a cowboy hat and jean jacket, and I'm looking at her like, wow, she looks like a Western girl. I love it. And you're getting ready to go out like that. And
yeah,
I was like, yeah, I can't pull that off in Omaha unless it's like a theme event.
but I wanted people who live here will tell you too, just like cowboy boots, there are good cowboy hats and they're the kind that you're going to wear to a concert once. And I really wanted a good cowboy hat and I wanted to get it fitted and I wanted to get it sized. It actually has, you see, it has the feathers on it.
Uh-huh.
This, the band is, you pick the band. The band is from Navajo and they did all the beading. It's Navajo
Oh,
beading
how
from the reservation.
nice.
And then my initials are, see my initials on the back,
Oh, yeah.
branded on the back.
Nice.
So it's my Stutzman hat, but I had decided that I really wanted to splurge and get a good cowboy hat. We're not moving, we're staying here. And my father-in-law they came in their boxes. I see people getting off the plane with their cowboy hat boxes. And yeah, I can get away with that here. And I actually like it. And just so you know, it's completely waterproof. But
Nice.
rather than saying, okay, so let's just talk about from a budgeting standpoint. It wasn't, gee, I didn't come home and hand wring and say I shouldn't have gotten that. I knew when the time was the time and I wanted the right store that just sold cowboy hats. It was fun. I was in Aspen. I was with friends. She had gotten a hat there that highly recommended it. Their daughter did. Um, but I had put that money aside and I was ready that when it happened, I wasn't going to buy just anything. And truly, that's part of back to zero-based budgeting, is it's not buying a lot of little things that you end up giving away.
Right.
It's waiting and buying those things that are authentically me. How about that, Amy? I'm the A
Right,
real, right?
right.
It's livable, it's here, and
It's realistic
it's
for
realistic,
Durango. It's very realistic. Yeah. Love
essential
it.
in my mind, at least today.
I
But
think it is.
shouldn't live in the poverty mentality, but we also can't do the opposite to say, I'll figure it out. You have to have a plan.
Yeah.
And I've always said, uh, if, if I could describe myself from a financial standpoint, both personally and in business and in consulting and in my work, is that I'm very practical. I understand, I understand fanciful, I understand futuristic, okay, but at the end of the day, I'm very practical. How are we going to do that? If we're going to borrow the money, what does the bank want? Here are the covenants that go around that. I'm pretty good at communicating it in a way that somebody can understand. But part of being practical is making practical choices as you go to equip yourself to always try to get the return you want on the money you spend from the money you make. And
Yes.
never, the practical rules are, think about where you spend your money, always know where it's going. If you can pay in cash because it feels real.
And you know what? That's what I do like about this younger generation is they're using debit cards instead of credit cards. And there's a big shift away from the credit card industry, which I think is really good. So there's a couple of financial conversations topics today in the newspaper in the Omaha World Herald. There was an article on the cover page about how much Americans spend on Halloween.
Really?
And
Okay.
yes, and I was reading and I was like, well, isn't this timely? We're talking about money today. $8 million, or I'm sorry, 8 billion with a B dollars is the
What are they
industry.
spending that on?
So it
Costumes,
had it
parties?
broken out. It was about a third in candy, a third in costumes, and a third in decorations. That each of those were like 2 point something billion. Okay. And so Tom and I went through the calculation because we're like, that's crazy.
A lot.
That's a lot of money. But I told him, I said, right now I don't spend a lot on Halloween, but I'm like, when our kids were little, we were all doing costumes. We were, and buying all those costumes. I'm like, we probably spent about a couple $100 on costumes each year. And sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on, what was needed for the costume or if we were going to a costume party or whatever. So I'm like, but he did the calculation and it was about $100 a family. If you kind of assume 4 people per family through the population. So anyway, I thought it was really interesting that we spend that much money on Halloween.
But it's interesting, back to, you put all these different pods of money together that you spend and how much that accumulates. COVID's
Yeah.
another example because we spent a lot on going out to eat. We spent a lot on, I love going to events, concerts, plays. I'm not condemning them, okay? But we spent a lot on that. Of buckets of money. When I say a lot, again, never, but that was clothes.
Clothes. That was
Clothes.
my eye opener was clothes because my clothing budget, well, my clothing purchases went to zero because
And then when we were able to wear them again, everything we had felt new, right? Like
right.
I felt like I really wanted to wear what I had.
Yeah.
And that felt new too. There's just some very general rules. The thing with zero-based budgeting and the word budgeting in general, I like zero-based because you're not just taking what you have and adding to it. I love the concept of looking and thinking through everything fresh and reminding yourself that we are creatures of habit. So just because we are doing it and just because it's not a bad experience or you dislike it doesn't mean you should, right?
Right.
Just because you are doing it doesn't mean you should. And you might be paying, my niece, she got rid of her gym membership because she's working out with my mom and I during COVID. And she's like, I really don't have time to run to the gym. I'm working and I'm getting the workout I need. And I get my cardio by running, walking, doing things outside. And this is my weight work. So I don't, if you would have asked her before we got to COVID, why would she ever give up her gym membership? But she
Right.
found an alternative. But my mom, oh, I always, here's some add-on things to zero-based budgeting. The word budgeting implies that you're planning, okay? Not every purchase is planned, but I would tell you 90% of the time an impulsive purchase is probably not a good one. And my mother always told me, when in doubt, don't.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I say that a lot to myself. Am I in doubt? Do I feel doubt here? Don't do it. Think about it, talk about it. And then when you do that, you can deploy those simple practical concepts like, do I really need it? Will it add to my reel? Is it part of that or is it just one more thing? And most of the time, those impulsive purchases that you're feeling a little angst about, follow your gut because it probably isn't something you should get.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. When I always give people the exercise when people are big buyers of clothes, and I go into closets all the time, and there's still tags on clothes, and it's they
Wow.
just you they buy it, they love it, but it just doesn't fit into their lifestyle.
Right,
That,
right.
they thought it would, and so I always tell people, I said, try it on, and when you're trying it on, say tomorrow I'm going to wear it and say if you're going to wear it, because if you're like tomorrow I don't know if it'll work, then it's kind of like a okay, so let's pause then and reevaluate, because if it doesn't work tomorrow, is it going to work the next day? Are you going to have other stuff that you like better than this? So anyway, that's a
How
good
often
exercise.
do they say when I lose weight?
Oh my gosh, yes, that is a huge
I
one.
say treat yourself and buy all new.
That's exactly, and I'm like, and don't keep those clothes in front of you all the time, making you feel bad every day.
Right,
That's like, let's get them out of the way so
right.
you can feel good every day. Okay, so I found this story. I was listening to a podcast, and this person was talking about Alan Naiman. Have you heard of this gentleman?
No, I have not.
He is a social worker, or was a social worker. I'm sorry. He passed away in 2018, and he was a social worker, I believe, in Washington State. Yes. He spent 2 decades in Washington's Department of Social and Health Services as oh, he was a banker. Okay, so I'm sorry. I thought he was a social worker. Anyway, he was doing volunteer work with some organizations, and but he was frugal. Like it says he made $67,000 a year, and he was known for being frugal. He wore old shoes held together with duct tape. He bought his apparel at a grocery store. He drove jalopies and ate at cheap restaurants. This is how they described him. So, okay. Well, when he passed away, he had $11 million dollars that he gave to charities. And he picked these charities because he had had experience. So one of them was I don't want to read the whole article with you to you, but one of them was helping children that were born addicted to meth or opioids.
Wow.
He had had some personal experience with that through, I thought he was a social worker, but I don't know. Um, and he donated $1 million to that organization. And they thought when he donated first $10,000, they said, they called him to make sure he didn't make a mistake and put too many zeros. And then he
That's
said,
funny.
oh, I know. He's like, oh, there's going to be more coming. And so then when he passed away, $1 million came their way. So anyway, I thought this was pretty awesome, because last week we talked about aging, and one of the priorities for people who age is that financial security, and along with health and relationships. And one of the things that kind of goes along with financial security, and I was having this conversation with my mom because I was with her last week, is how to die broke. And many years ago, I heard of this book of how to die broke, and I was talking to my mom about spending her money, and how is she spending her money, because fortunately she has some financial security, but how does she really enjoy it and stop being frugal and start enjoying her money, which
Right.
she's doing fine, she's having fun, but you know and how does she die broke, because really that's her money is hers and she should enjoy it. But this guy made me think a little different of what good can we do with that money after
Right.
we're gone. And so anyway, I just thought this was really cool because nobody knew he had that much money.
And how old was he at that time?
He passed away in his 60s. He was 63. So he
So
was,
we're
yeah,
talking about older. I'm going to bring it back to younger. So I talk back to where you can, the reality is time is not to our benefit when it comes to putting money away, when it comes to mortality. There is just a reality, right? Back to what we talked about last week. I tell young people all the time, my stepson, we had a great talk about this. Warren Buffett, his number one advice is compounding, compounding, compounding.
right,
Save and start early. They're very simple. People think I got to read a book and I got to be like Warren Buffett and pick stocks. I got to do all this stuff. Finances are pretty simplistic. I mean, really, the financial advice, what I would hear in the CP, I don't want to pay taxes. Okay, I get that. But realistically, if this is what people would focus on, would be saving, don't touch that money. Don't put as much into 401k, take the free money that your corporation is matching and giving you and just let it build. Don't
right,
worry about the markets going up and down. The markets are efficient. They will just leave it there. I look at the money I have in retirement. I look back to how much I actually put in versus what compounded. Start early as soon as you can. Don't touch it. Let it be a budget item. From zero-based budgeting, absolutely a need, not to a point where you can't live, right? Do what you can, what's within your means. And then on the opposite side, don't pay interest on things, okay? My golden rule that I always say is do not borrow against future earnings, because that is wreaked with havoc, because you don't know when COVID's going to hit. You don't know when you're going to lose your job, and you are banking. That's a gamble, because you don't know. You could be disabled. You don't know what's going to happen. A house, absolutely, but within your means. Don't be married to your house. House, absolutely. And when you're young, a car, but a cheaper car, and have the goal that you, every time you get a different car, that you can write a check for it someday. Don't borrow money. Don't pay other people interest. Build your interest. Have a great life. Live within your means. Hold your money close to the things that are important to you. Pay for those things. And then when you do get older, you will have the benefit of either giving it to charity, choosing what you want to do with it, living your best life, because you were a good steward of your money up until that time. And earnings does play into that. I do love about the younger generation, they love a hustle. There was a stat, maybe you'll remember this, Amy. There was a stat, what percentage of like 20 to 35-year-olds have a side hustle to make extra money, their mad money? Um, and it's high. It's like 44%, I think. Does
oh
that
wow,
sound right? I'll have to
that's
look that up to be
the
sure, but it's
side
pretty
hustle.
high.
I love that. Yeah,
They have a side hustle, and that's their mad money. That's their play money. And you know what? You work hard for your play money. If the play money goes away, the play money doesn't go out. There's nothing,
right,
there
right.
is nothing unsound about that concept, right? Um, those general, and then you do get older and you do have to figure it out because you want financial security, and it gets tougher, but there are ways, there are ways. Pay for the things that are dear to you. Amy, back to I thought about this one about pre-COVID, about things that we spent money on too. How many times were you with groups of people and you were drinking? And this happened more when we had kids in town. You were out to dinner and everybody decided we're all going to go on a big trip together.
Oh
Have you ever
yeah,
done that?
yes, we
Like
do
the
that all
big
the
group
time.
trips that
Yeah, yeah,
sounded so good, like impulsiveness.
yeah, yeah.
Were they fun? Absolutely. Would I
Right.
did I have
Yeah.
were they necessary? Probably not. Don't, so here, good tip to everybody. Don't commit to an expensive trip when you're out. Maybe take a step
Yeah,
back
when
and
you're
say,
out.
have
Good
you
point.
ever done that before? I've
Oh,
done that
totally.
before.
Completely. And then it's always the next day. Are we really doing this?
I had a friend who told me that she and her husband, like they said, we should go to Sundance and, the Sundance Film Festival. And they signed up. And then by the time, like after the fact, they signed up for the core stuff. And like it was all, they had a fun time, but it was all added together. And it's like, that was an expensive vacation that we came up with on.
Right. We had, so one of my girls lives in Kansas City, and we had a group of friends. They all got together and they were going to go to Kansas City for the weekend. And we had just been there a couple of weeks ago, like helping her move, and we're there all the time. And they were going to go stay at hotels. And I'm just going to say this is during COVID. And it was just kind of like, yeah, we were just there. Nothing's open. We're not going to go do hotel nights there. But it was a little bit of a, yeah, I don't think we're going to do that trip. But
We don't think that feels quite so
yeah,
good.
we were just there. So anyway, but I think they had a great time. They still had a ton of fun and
It's
a group of
it's all, sometimes it's those random trips out of nowhere that can be just as much fun. It's
yeah,
I think my biggest point is the practicality of zero-based budgeting is being intentional in your decision making. Don't
yes,
do things to make other people happy. Don't jump on the bandwagon. Don't keep paying something because you don't want the confrontation of not paying. You've worked hard for your money. You want to have a long and fruitful life, and it's what the decisions you make today do have a complete dependency on how you're going to live when
right,
you're in your 60s and 70s, because back to that compounding and saving, and you can do it without being so frugal that you have no fun when you're young or when
right,
you're middle aged. It can be done. You got to make the choices, but you're driving it. At the end of the day, the business, the person is driving. It's their money and it's their choices.
right. As you're saying that, I'm sitting here scribbling notes because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so good because it's a lot about being authentic to who you are. Because again, a lot of times we choose to spend money on things that other people recommend to us that just because they got it doesn't mean we need it. It could be trips that other people are going on, but it may not be something that's really like we're dying to go on. There's so many things
I
that
mean,
we
there's
spend
a reason
money on
that
that
tiered
aren't
marketing works, right?
right.
Right? There's a reason that there's a reason businesses do tiered marketing,
Totally.
because
Yes.
people buy from people because they feel bad if they don't, and then there's a reason they do it too, because then they don't stop doing it. They keep spending it.
Right, right, right. Totally. Okay. That's awesome. Very true.
Can I tell you one last story that I thought about with this? And I don't, because are we out of time for this part?
We're good. We can do this and then we'll move on to
Quick
questions.
story. So ethics training they always do for CPAs, where they basically, after Arthur Anderson, you had to have so much ethics training where somebody comes in and tells you how never to steal or cheat. Usually it's really dry, but about 10 years ago, they brought in a guy that he was convicted of white collar crime. I don't remember exactly what he did, but he was part of all the fraudulent crap that went down even before 2008. And actually, maybe it was around that time. It was after that. But what always struck me about him telling his story, because he basically told his story, the ethics training was about how he rode higher than high and he made these bad decisions. They didn't feel so bad at the time. There was peer pressure, other people were doing them, and how he hit rock bottom, ended up in jail. But what I remember about his story is about how when he was flying high and making all this money, let's just say he was making $1 million a year,
Right.
and he had convinced himself that he couldn't live, like he ran the numbers, he couldn't live under $800,000 a year for his family. And I mean, he had convinced himself of this, and he had convinced himself that he had to do all these things because he couldn't leave his job because his family would not survive. Then he went to jail. He was divorced, he was broke, he was sick, he got out of jail with zero. Talk about zero-based budgeting. And I think he got his first job working at a laundromat, and he said he was the most happy he was in 20 years with the simple things in life that he got. And a lot of it was from the lessons learned, but comparing how he condoned getting in the trouble he got in because he couldn't lose his job because he couldn't live under $800,000 a year, to a guy making 12 bucks an hour and saying he had the highest quality of life he had had in 20 years.
Right. I think the more you make, the more you spend.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. It kind of brings an idea of minimalism. Have you ever heard of the people who live with less than 100 things?
Oh, I've never
It's
heard of an actual count.
Yeah, there's you can, it's like the 100 thing challenge or something. And many years ago, it was kind of a thing that people were trying to do, and they would count. And if you look around and you counted the 100 things, it's very liberating though to live with just that 100 things because that's all you have to maintain. You don't have to replenish things. You don't have to, it's just it's a different kind of lifestyle. So anyway,
What
it's a
counts as a thing?
everything counts as a
Like one
thing.
earring is one thing, one ear, everything. So would
Well,
my hat count as four things because of two
I would
ears and hand?
say, yeah, your hat would be one. Me personally, I would count earrings as one. Like a pair of shoes would be one thing. I don't, but
Man, I think I'd have 25 things in my purse alone.
I know. You think about 100 things.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I have not tried it. I don't know that I could. And I'm kind of a minimalist too, but 100 things is a little low for me.
You got this in my head now. So I'm actually gonna count the things in my purse after this, and that will probably stress me
Oh
out. I'll give
gosh,
it a try.
I'll be interested to hear that. Okay, so let's go on to some questions. Um, this zero-based budgeting is super interesting. And here's one of the questions we got. How about all the expenses that I don't want but can't get out of right away?
So you have an obligation.
So there's an obligation to that expense. So let's say,
You signed up for a country club that you have a 2-year obligation to.
right,
Car payment.
a car payment, a house payment.
I think the biggest thing in my mind is, first of all, make up your mind if it's something you don't want to keep, and then come up with a plan on either a couple different things, finding a side hustle to pay for it, but
Yeah,
earmarking it in your mind as something that you have to make up your mind that that's not an ongoing expense that you want. Sometimes you can negotiate, if it's a due, just to say, can I pay a reduced fee? I'm not using it anymore. Try to negotiate something, see if you can. You can't get, another thing my mom always said is, you can't get a yes if you don't ask.
right.
Can't hurt to ask. Put yourself out there, right? Ask the question. If you're stuck, maybe get a side hustle. Maybe you do have to make that sacrifice somewhere else, right, to pay for that, and then know that other sacrifice can come back once I get this paid for. Um, I think the biggest thing, Amy, is to acknowledge the fact. Don't write it off as, well, I'm just stuck with it, I'm just going to keep doing it, and not acknowledge that it's not a necessary expense or something I want. I think the biggest thing is acknowledging it and accepting it, and then coming up with the best plan you can. What do you think?
I'm thinking a little bit about your niece's gym membership.
Mhm.
She probably thought this is something I have to have. I'm also, you kind of brought up something, this is a funny memory. Um, Back in probably the early 2000s, there were credit cards that charged yearly fees. And I don't know if they still do that or not.
Some do. I know Southwest does.
Do they? So there's this yearly fee.
Right.
Well, we found out that you could call them and say, I'm not going to pay the yearly fee. And then they would waive the yearly fee. And then you could just go about your business and keep using it. Like you could keep it, but you didn't pay the yearly fee. Um, so making that phone call was kind of, I mean, it was only $20 or $50 a year. It wasn't like it was a crazy amount, but it was a little something. And so we told my mother about it. And my mom sent, she wrote on the bill, she said, I don't want to pay this fee, so cancel my card. And they canceled her card.
They canceled her card.
She's like, you told me I could do that. We're like, no, you have to make the phone call and ask. You don't, you can't just send a note
Canceled her
and say,
card.
cancel
That's
my card.
hilarious.
So anyway, but your point of just asking and making adjustments, I just did that with my XM radio because I decided it's one of those things that I'm paying every month. It's not much because I've negotiated it down because it's amazing when you call in make that phone call, they negotiate down really low. And so this time I'm like, I'm canceling it because I'm going to do Spotify and I'm going to be listening to Spotify in my car. That's what I thought in my head. I'm like, yeah, this is a great plan. And so I was ready to cancel and I kept saying, I'm going to cancel. And the customer service rep said, well, can we do this? Can we do this? So turns out they've refunded my last month and they've given it to me free through the end of January. And I
Well,
was like, all right. So I just have to call before the end of January and tell them I want to cancel. And who knows, I might get XM radio free again. But
you
what
can't
you
get a
said,
yes if you don't ask.
right, you just have to ask and negotiate and just and decide if it's essential, if it's not essential. And then sometimes we just have to suck it up. If we've committed to something, like we have a house, we have to pay for it until we can sell it. And we just gotta suck it up.
And then you just, if you've got to be prepared to take a no or live with your decision
Right. Right. And
and
lesson
figure out
learned.
a means around it. Because it's back to, I'm like, everything is numbers. So if you have this much, because not to complicate things, but if you Google, people have taken the zero-based budgeting and come up with a different formula, which is you spend what you make. And it's not a bad concept. I don't love it because you're not looking at what you started with, but at least you're not spending more than you make. But the
Right.
concept is if you can't bring the expenses down or you don't want to, then you have to bring the income up. Okay. But then just think about it as two different buckets. And just like you had said before, Amy,
It's like a
sometimes that
balance.
bucket goes way up in what people make. And so then they keep spending more. And, my gut is I'm never good with that because I feel that as being handcuffs to myself. The more financial commitments you make or lifestyle you go to, the harder it is to wind it back down. And I feel like it's not my choice then. You lose the intentionality of how you're spending your money, but so many people fall into that of make more, spend more. And it, but it's okay to think through, I'm not making enough to sustain these things that I really want to have. Then you have to figure out a means to make more or pay something off or something's got to go.
Right.
This
So,
math.
Sandy, one of the things that we haven't talked about in this, and I want to make sure we touch on, is children. Sometimes our expenses are kid related. And I'm just sitting here thinking of sports. We spent a lot of money on um, volleyball and soccer. And um, and so it wasn't about just me making that decision on what was good for me. I was committing to spending money for my children. And so that starts to be a different ballgame because saying no to our children and which is hard, but we have to do sometimes
You
if we don't
should
have,
do more.
and we should do
Because
more.
a
Yeah,
lot of people are making a lot of money off of children and dogs right now because
yeah.
there's
So
more select teams, there's more trainers. I mean, I can point out all the businesses or the business models. If it has to do with kids or pets, people are going to pay for it because they're too afraid. They're afraid their children are not going to succeed and it's going to be blamed on them because they didn't give them the extra edge somewhere. And it
right.
costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
Amy, great story about my brother. His kids were in marching band and they were a very good marching band. They would get sent to the Macy Day Parade. They went to Japan. Every year they went to Macy Day Parade every year, but they'd go somewhere. Japan, Mexico, expensive trips.
Yeah.
And back in like 2008, and my brother worked in the building industry. And you know what that was like? He said, guys, you're going to have to pay for half the cost if you want to go this year. The other 2 years they would have just died if they wouldn't go there. And they both worked very hard. They had money in their savings and they said, I'm not spending money on that. They're like,
Right.
I'm not going to spend my money on that. No, I don't want to go. And isn't it really interesting that if part of the money comes from them, you'll really find out how badly they want to go. And I think of that all the time that the
Yeah.
minute, and again, they're not bad kids, but when he said, you're paying, I need you to pay for half of it. And they didn't even think about it. No hand wringing. They said, no, we're fine. We don't want to spend
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's, I think, a good conversation to have kids with kids is for them to have some ownership and them to learn how the zero-based budgeting would be great for a kid because they kind of start with zero and it's like, what are you spending your money on this month?
what do these things cost?
And starting at a young age and having the conversations about how expensive some of these sports are. We didn't let our kids do any select sports till they were older, and if they were going to do it, they had there had to be a commitment beyond, like they couldn't keep doing all the other stuff. They had to dedicate the time and stuff like that. And so it was a sacrifice for them. I'm like, we're not gonna pay for this and let you do all of this too, so you can only give this half time. So if you're gonna do it, you gotta give it your all. So, but I mean, they were 13 and 14. It's not like they were 5 years old and we said, you can only do this, you know? So, um,
I could
but
have done a lot better. I could have done a lot better with my kids. My dad did a good job with us. It's harder with the debit card thing though, Amy, just because and I'm not making excuses. I could have done better rather than just paid for things and taking care of things. But what my dad did is we had checkbooks when we were old enough to have checkbooks as kids. And when we did our chores and helped him clean his shop, he would put money in our accounts. I wrote a check for every lunch ticket, for every uniform, everything that was other than my room and board, I wrote a check for. It was now again, it was really he was brilliant in his thinking because it was a flow through. We got paid enough to pay for everything, but I knew exactly what everything cost. I knew exactly, what that was. And it was a great exercise to go through as a
yeah.
child. And I tried to deploy that in different ways with my own kids, but I probably wasn't as stringent as I could have been because I do think there is a ton to be learned at any age for them to actually be the one to see that money to really understand how much things cost
Oh, totally.
and to be
So much.
intentionally do zero-based budgeting. What's
Yeah.
most important to you? Because you can't have it all and we shouldn't give them it all.
Yeah. We used to, when my kids were really young, and I can't remember exactly what the formula was, but we gave them an allowance. And we're just like, that's your allowance. Like, we didn't tie it to chores or anything, but they had that much money a month.
Mhm.
Okay. And I'm just going to say it was $20. I don't remember exactly what it was, but that was their movie money. That was their hanging out with friends money. Like, if they were going to go do something. So they had to plan ahead. If
Right.
they couldn't go to come and go every single day, and my son, I'm gonna say he was the worst because he would get the $20 and he would go and spend it the first weekend, and then the rest of the month he would be broke. And it was my job the whole month to say, "Oh, that's a bummer." Well, the beginning of the month is, in 3 weeks. So, but my goal was for him to learn that I'm not going to just give you more money. You have to like plan and be strategic and maybe save. If you're going to, Vala's is open in October, you're going to go 3 times, then you might want to save your money in September. So it's more of a lesson learned, hopefully. You know, my kids are fairly okay with finances, but the other thing was we had them contribute to college. We're like, we're fortunate enough that we can give you a college education, but here's your piece of it. So
Put some skin in the game.
right, you got to have some skin in the game. I think kids throw in a different a bit when you start at zero-based budgeting and their stuff, it's lessons they need to learn, but also some negotiation and some stuff with their activities and explaining how much this stuff is costing. And so they're fully aware that
And I
it's
do have the benefit of hindsight because my
I
oldest is
know, don't we
27.
all?
And I think about like all what probably my husband, their dad and I thought at the time was so important, probably even more so than him. It was probably more important to us than him. And yes, it's always good to get coached and play on a team and be active. But I tell you, the things where you had the best experience would have been the PAL League sports, the high school sports, the intramurals, the the fun, let's work together. And it wasn't the select teams, it wasn't all the extra trainers and trying out and politicking to get on the right teams, and then paying an arm and a leg and doing fun. It, was there any return on that investment? Not a lot, for him. And again, every kid is different, but
Every kid.
the return on investment were probably the activities that were just part of his school program to begin with, and the costs that went with those.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how you get caught up in that. Um, my son Trevor is a senior right now, and he still has a group of guys he plays basketball with in the Y League. And, you know, it is so much fun watching them because they go to the practices on their own. They go to the games on their own. Sometimes we go and watch the games just for fun. But it's just for fun. They're just out there playing basketball, having a good time. There's no pressure.
Right.
There's no tryouts. There's nothing. He's having a good time. And I'm like, that's a good. I enjoy it. So anyway. Okay, final discussion question. What's the real in these situations and what's the ideal?
You go first.
I'm gonna say the real in this is uh, being authentic and identifying the essential. And I think that's the real in it. And knowing, I wrote this down because I was like, real. You can say no. You can say no to things that aren't, that you can't afford or that you don't want to pay for. I think of that gentleman, Alan Naiman, and him wearing duct tape on his shoes. And I was like, I would never go out in public with duct tape on my shoes. But boy, if I had the courage to do that, it could be a game changer. If I started duct taping my shoes and stopped spending money and then, who knows how much money I'd have when I retired. So that's kind of the real in it. Or
You know,
maybe that's the ideal. I don't know.
I'm going to put my answer to this final discussion question, and maybe it's because it's front and center because we're in an election year. So I'm just going to say we live in a country, and this is a non-political answer, but country is front and center. And
Yeah.
our flag is our flag. It's all of ours. It doesn't belong to any party, any one person. And with that, our
Yes.
real is we have so many opportunities to change jobs, to make money, to have a side hustle. So we live in a place where we do have opportunity, and your real might be what it is today, but we have opportunities in any shape or form to try to find other ways, whether it's a better job, whether it's a side hustle, whether it's even a lower quality of life because I don't want to work quite as much. So we have opportunity. The downside of that reel is we also have a lot of opportunity in purchases and things to do and fun that are always tempting us. And
Yes.
so the ideal is understanding we have wonderful options and opportunities on both sides, but to embrace both of them and be bold and take the steps and make it your plan.
I love that. I love the be bold.
Yeah.
Yes. Be bold and be true to yourself.
And wear the damn cowboy hat.
And wear the cowboy hat. I love that. Yes. I'm just going to say that was our first cuss word today.
Oh, darn it, we did good.
We did really good
Damn is
work.
not a bad one, though, is it?
No, no, it wasn't
It could have
bad.
been the dam. The dam broke, right?
Yeah, we're good. Um, okay, so our wrap question for today, because we are in October of 2020, and what's your favorite thing about fall?
I love everything about fall. It's my favorite season. I've always loved Halloween. I have a whole, back to, we're talking about money, but just so you know, I have got a whole, all my Halloween stuff is up. I've got a whole Halloween village, the Department 66, that I put up every year and buy one new piece. I stopped buying pieces when the kids were like out of grade school. But I love everything about it. I miss Vallis Pumpkin Patch. Um, I miss, haven't done anything like the things that come with having kids that are younger, like the bonfires. I miss fall football games.
Oh yeah,
Um, I love everything about it, Amy. It's just I savor hoodies with shorts.
I know.
Yeah, I
That's all
love it
the stuff
all.
I love. I'm with you. I love that. I love the fire pits. Last night I was with girlfriends and we were sitting around a fire pit, and I was like, "Oh, that's just so nice." And but food. I am so excited because it's going to get cold next week, and
Right?
I'm planning soups, and I'm just like, "Oh, I can't wait to start having soups again because we don't do soup in the summer because it's a little too warm."
Too warm. I love that.
I know.
Fall goes quick, but I love it. Oh, the trees. How can I say this? The aspens
Oh,
here.
yes, I bet the
Stunning.
apples are beautiful.
Stunning. So yeah, no
Yeah, and
complaint.
they're starting to change here too. It's nice. I agree. I love falls. I love the cool mornings. I love the cool nights, the warm days. It's beautiful. It's one of my favorite seasons too.
Life is good.
Life is good. Yes, and be bold,
And be
right?
bold.
Be bold. All right. Thanks for joining us today. This is Your Real, Your Ideal.
Bye, everyone. We'll
All
talk
right.
next week. Bye, Amy.
All right.